tell me about your experience working with Neil Gaiman,
Well,
Sandman in
we
general.
were very young back then, and we were both making our name. And he was just getting the ball rolling, and I was just getting the ball rolling. And I think we both had chips on our shoulder about, in a good way, of wanting to present who we were on our own terms. Sandman was kind of a cult book then.
Yeah.
It was doing okay, but it wasn't. It was for the people on the peripheral fandom of comics. There's the center part that's Batman, Avengers, all that stuff, and then there's out there in Pluto are the Swamp Thing and Sandman and those things. When they got a hold of me, it was to do Calliope, because that was considered, and rightfully so, a horror story. And I had just come off for Karen Berger doing, she'd seen what I've been doing on Deadman, and she saw I did a Swamp Thing with her that they liked quite a bit. So Neil had seen it and said to Karen, I'm going to do these single episodic stories, one shots. I would like to see if you could get Kelley to do this one because it's a pretty creepy story. And they gave it to me, and it came off very successfully. I was very experimental in it, and I got to utilize storytelling in a way that it's a pretty rough story. So I didn't want anything erotic to it or anything. And Karen, who was editing it, I was aware I'm working for a woman on a story of a very abusive situation. But I didn't let that deter me and hamper me. So I went and did what I did. Neil was very impressed with that issue. So was Karen, because I handled it in a way they felt absolutely got it across, but I didn't do anything gruesome. That would have changed it, and it wouldn't have been as interesting. I think your mind does worse. So I wasn't slated to do the cat issue. That was, I was on to other things. But Neil had gotten had overcome a terrible writer's block. And Calliope was the one that broke that. So he was way behind. And so the cat story was something he had in mind because he wanted to get across Sandman's impact is beyond just human. Cat's dream, right? So he's got to be involved in that. And nobody wanted the story. And everyone they were offering didn't want to draw cats for 22 pages, And I didn't know any of this. It was just Karen called me up and said, I know it's a really tight deadline. I know, but the story's about cats. And as soon as she said, I would understand if you don't want to do it. I've asked 4 or 5 people, and she named them, and they didn't want to do it. I said, I got it. It's mine. Send it. I'll do it. And she says, well, Neil's still writing it, but I'll tell him you're on board. And I said, okay. About a week later, the script comes. I was kicking myself because it was all cats. I had to draw cats. But it was so powerful. When I read the thing, it was so good. And like you, I have cats. So I just, at that time I had 1 cat, and I just used him. He was Sandcat, and he was, I used him just for everything. And I had pictures from when he was a kitten. So I had a lot of, as I knew how to draw cats, but Neil was right. Every cat had to be kind of different. So I had to go look at different kinds. I had friends' cats. I went and bought a Cat Fancy magazine to go look at different cats. And those people, if comic book people are weird, we're nothing compared to the Cat Fancy people. So, but it came out absolutely. I knew. I called him up almost every 3 or 4 days. I'd say, Neil, this is going to be such a big book. I can tell you, this is the one. This is the one you can just show to people, right? You don't even have to say you know all the lore and know all the history and any explanation. You just say, this is why I like Sandman. And he was taken with that. When that book came out, I went to go, there was a small chain of comic book stores out here called Comics and Comics. And they had some in the San Francisco area. They had some in Sacramento. They had some in Oakland. They're all in that area. And so a friend of mine who ran it said, would you do a little signing for Sandman? You're doing the Sandman, you did Deadman. And I went. When I went, it was like I had not seen a reaction to not just fans, but I mean people who are hardcore. We've seen it all on that issue. And it was exactly what I had told them was happening. People were handing it to others and saying, you got to read this. Even if you don't, this is why I like it. I think the only time I ever saw that prior in my experience was Frank Miller's Daredevil. When Frank Miller was doing Daredevil, people were doing that. They would say, I know you comics are still, just read this one.
Yeah.
And they would be turned on to what Frank was doing on Daredevil. And I had told Neil that. I said, I think that's the only other time I've seen that. Those had done so well. At that point, Neil called me up and said, Karen's going to call you because you're the guy to do Seasons of Mist after those two issues. And he sent me like an outline of what it kind of was. It was a work in progress, but it was what he called it was his Sgt. Pepper's run. It will be the Sgt. Pepper's album of Sandman comics. Because it was really setting the tone. He had worked 2 years to get to it. He had hoped against hope that it wouldn't be canceled so he could get to it, which he's going through now. He's waiting for the show to get renewed to do Seasons of Mist. But the cat issue was one that I was hearing, and I still hear from people who aren't into comics. That may not, but that issue really gets to them. And it's a hard issue, but it's emotionally one of the most satisfying things you read. When you come to the end, it is so satisfying. And a lot of people try to shield themselves from emotions nowadays rather than and they're affected by the world so much. And I find that what Neil does so well is he lets you in a comic book feel those emotions. So when you really do have something happen, you're kind of ready for it. You're kind of, you have something that it's like exercise. You got to sometimes use a muscle or you'll lose it. You got to run your car or you'll lose it. And I think that's what's even more important in art or literature. And certainly the cat issue is one of those things. That there's some rough stuff in it. Calliope had some rough stuff, but it's worthy material. It transcends good and evil in that sense. It's what we feel. It's what we do. It's how the most angry I've ever heard people about something is the guy who drowns the kittens. I always hear, man, kill him. And I go, yes, that's the feeling, but it's the moment that makes the prophet do what she does. And everyone,
sorry, go on.
No, it's just, that's a necessary thing. You can't just say one day they didn't give me my cat food the way I wanted.
Yeah.
One day they didn't let me in on a cold day. It has to be something that we ourselves would feel. I give Neil an enormous amount of credit because I thought when he wrote Calliope, he was really shredding creative people. You know, that basically were users of other people's lives. And that's what he was talking about. He was talking about himself and everybody else he knew, that you hear something and you go, oh, that's awful. Did that really happen? And then you write it down. I think I could use that.
I think if a story can affect you emotionally in that sort of way, it's no longer just a story, it's an experience. And
I do this for a living, and those stories stayed with me my whole career. I still think about them. And that is not because I worked on them. like anything great, they stayed with me. And I have always joked with my wife, who was there when I was doing it. I said, we got to be nice to them or they'll dream that dream. That was an in joke in the family. Now everybody gets it, right? That was the thing. And you better get up and feed them because they'll dream that dream. And then they'll be doing this to us, you know? So, but it just became, and that's hard to do. That's hard to enter into a, public discourse that way, but it only comes if something matters. So when I hear people say, well, Calliope was rough even then, or the cat, I go, you need to emotionally get into that and it's not really happening, but let Neil's magic work over you. And when it comes to the end of these stories, they're so satisfying. They never go away. Like anything really good, they do not go away. Yeah. And Neil doesn't serve it up in a way that, you know, there's no way to know where these are going. When you first read them, you have no idea where they're going. And when you get to the point where you come to that conclusion, you find there's no other way but this way to do it. I will give him that. And though when they aired, I remember he got a hold of me and he said, we're working on these. And this was several months ago and we're not telling anyone. So don't tell anyone. But they showed me some of what they were doing and it was shocking. And the cat one felt like when that book was coming out again, it was like, wow, beautifully done. I didn't know how they would, when he said we're doing Dream, I said, well, how are you going to do that? And he says, you know, they came and said, we want to animate it. And I went, that's how you do it. That is how you do it. I was thinking, is this going to look like a cat food commercial with talking? I don't know. I don't know how you do that. But animated is the way to do it. And to me, it was in a fabulous series. It's a standout, just like it was 30 some odd years ago. And yeah. I don't say that because of my involvement. I felt that way when I got those scripts. I felt Calliope had such an edge because he was tearing himself apart. And as a writer, the biggest fear Neil had was no ideas, and he'd just come off that. And then what writers do, and I've heard Stephen King say it, and I've heard other writers say it, that they sometimes have to realize, don't be a ghoul. You know, but they are. I mean, yeah. Any creative person, I'm that way. You just see things and you go, oh, that'll be good. Can't tell anyone that you know, but it just goes into this flat file in your head. And God bless Neil for those were courageous then, they're courageous now.
It's an exciting time to be a Neil Gaiman fan.
I think he probably has worried over this more than anything because it's what he built his name on. And it's the closest to his heart, and comics are closest to our heart. There just are, and it's why it's so unique, and it's why I tell people, let's stay comic book guys. Let's not be movie or TV guys. If they want to adapt, fine. I'm all for that, but we still keep doing what we're doing. And I think he waited until the right time. I think he took good counsel from other people at DC, Karen Berger, until the right thing could come along. Don't shove it all. It turned out to be fortunate. Why shove it into one movie? Streaming is the best way to do it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it all was good fortune. But I think he's look. When I first saw Dream, I don't think I've been as happy, not in a personal sense that way, but that it did what it did then.
Yeah.
It did the same thing. Oh, you're not into Sandman? Just watch this episode. You don't have to know the history of Sandman. You don't have to know it. And then people got into it again, or you brought new people in. And because I saw Sandman when I did Seasons of Mist, it went from maybe selling at the local store about 40 copies a month to 600. And it was doing X-Men numbers for them because Seasons just exploded. And there's at that point, I give all the credit to Karen Berger and Neil Gaiman, because that was their baby, their idea. She fought to keep that thing on the stands, and that is comics history. It was such a good decision that even when they do it on television, it's getting that same reaction.
Oh, that is incredible.
I think it's the best thing DC's put to film in a long, long time.